Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to talk about Smile, directed by Parker Finn, starring Sosie Bacon, Jessie T. Usher, and Kyle Gallner. And this is a movie that I honestly wasn't too excited for because the trailer just didn't do it for me. I thought the scares and the smiling gimmick was just super goofy and funny. It wasn't scary at all, and the trailer ended on a strong note with that great jump scare at the end of that, which I'll get into that in a second here. But I was surprised by this movie because of its craft, because there was a confident hand behind the camera, and I really did enjoy this movie despite it being a fairly conventional horror movie. And so we are going to be talking about spoilers for this movie, so if you have not seen Smile, I think this is a great date night horror movie that will work for a lot of people. It really does reach for a general audience, and for a lot of general audiences, this movie is going to be really solid. And for people who haven't seen The Ring or other curse movies like this, I think that it's a great introduction to this style of movie. So let's just jump right into this thing. And my question for you guys is, have you guys seen The Ring? Because if the answer is yes, then you've seen this movie before, because it follows sequence for sequence exactly what that movie does. Because, you know, this movie of course follows Rose's character, who discovers that she is next in line for this curse, and nobody around her believes her, so she does some investigating to try to figure out the origins of this thing. She figures out that it's a long line of people that are all inflicted with this curse, and at the end of the 7 days, everybody dies and it's passed on to the next victim. And this movie got to the point where I was basically thinking that, okay, this is how this next sequence is going to start. It's going to play out this way, and it's going to end with this sort of scare, and then we're going to move on to this next sequence. And that's exactly what happened. I was able to basically predict every single scene that was going to happen right after the scene that I just watched, and it just got to a point where nothing really truly original happened in this film. However, the reason why I did enjoy this movie is because I'm fine with tropes and cliches in horror movies, or movies in general, if it is well done, because all movies have been made before, essentially. There's nothing too original out nowadays, but when you have a movie that is able to do all these tropes really well with a great directorial hand behind the camera like Parker Finn, then it's actually really well done. And if you're someone who hasn't seen The Ring or other curse movies like this, I think this movie might blow you away. Sosie Bacon plays the main character Rose in this film, and she's a great protagonist to follow in this movie because you really do want to root for her. And with other curse movies like this, because there's so many that try to rip off The Ring, you know, after that movie came out, or The Grudge, or whatever curse movies that you want to talk about, even Candyman, there's a bunch of different movies like this, but a lot of the protagonists in some of these ripoffs are not great. Their backstories are not interesting, and this character actually is really deeply rooted in trauma with things that happen in her past. The movie opens with a flashback of her as a little girl that goes into the bedroom and discovers her mom has committed suicide, and you find out later on that she could have done something. The mom was calling out for help, and she decides to run away, and she hides because she's so scared, because she's only 10 years old, and that trauma carries with her throughout the entire history of her entire life. And so that's what this movie is really about. It's about her trauma and her trying to deal with this other traumatic event when she witnesses her patient kill herself in front of her, which starts her journey on this curse. And I think her story is very entertaining to watch from beginning to end of this movie. And without Parker Finn as the director of this movie, and his style that he puts towards this thing, and his confidence as a director to pull off these tropes and pull off these scares in a very believable and entertaining way, it really does work. I honestly think that this smiling gimmick would not work in any other movie besides this one, because it is done as best as it possibly can in this film because of his direction. And I will say that his style is very much mimicking that of the modern sensibilities of horror today. There's a lot of upside down shots, spinning camera moves that you see in different, you know, elevated horror movies nowadays, but it's applying that to a story that we've seen before, like The Ring. It's basically a Ring remake, and I'd rather them make movies like this that is technically a Ring remake without making yet another Ring movie, because I'm kind of tired of Ring movies, but make something slightly original with this Smile movie with some sort of gimmick that's going to pull people into theaters, and you're going to have a successful horror movie. And so all these different curse movies are going to have different rules that they're going to have to follow, and so this movie has its own set of rules that starts off with the character having to witness a suicide by somebody who has been inflicted with this curse, and that now passes that, you know, trauma on to the next person. That is how this curse thrives. It thrives with trauma. Once a person is traumatized by that event, then they're going to start to see, you know, this entity putting on the masks of people around them, whether it's actual people that are there or different hallucinations or different, you know, pieces of their past, and they're all going to be having this really creepy smile on their faces, and it's just going to give them such an unsettling and creepy feeling. They're just going to slowly go mad until they can't handle it anymore, until this, you know, entity can fully take over this person and kill themselves in front of the next victim. And I'll be honest, right away I thought of the idea that, you know, if a person, you know, isolates himself completely, because there has to be a witness to this trauma, since that is the way that it's passed. If you just isolate yourself, I think you're going to survive. But then of course this entity is going to do everything it possibly can to try to get you to go home, making you think that you left places, making you think that you're safe, and doing all these things to try to keep you safe. But I think that the movie has rules that are good enough for the audience to be able to figure things out early enough to be like, okay, this is what you need to do, and the characters do what you want them to do. And I do think that the script doesn't always trust the audience to figure these things out on their own. sometimes it has to spoon feed you. There's a sequence where Rose's character has to go to a past victim that actually did survive, and the cop character says that, oh, instead of him killing himself in front of somebody else, he was in an incident where he murdered somebody and somebody witnessed the murder, and then that passed it on to that person. And it's like, okay, that's how it passes on. That's how you survive. You have to kill somebody else to inflict, that trauma on somebody else rather than you having to kill yourself. And so this leads to an entire sequence where Rose goes to a prison to try to figure out what happened with this guy. How did he pass it on to somebody else, even though the audience already figured it out because it was kind of already explained to us. And so it feels like sequences like that feel like wasted time. And I feel like this mystery doesn't always present itself like, okay, maybe it's going to be this thing, but it ends up being something else, and it's surprising and it's new and it's different. And I think The Ring does that really well, where it's like kind of leading you on to one thing, you're kind of leading down this mystery and you're always wondering what's going to happen. It feels like you as an audience aren't always one step ahead of the characters in the movie. But I don't need this movie to be wholly original and to have all these great, crazy mysteries and big reveals that happen later on in this film, because what really does matter is these scare sequences in this thing, because that's what this movie's trying to do, is trying to give you a little startle with these different, tension sequences that end in a jump scare that are not false jump scares, that is always something that is actually happening. It's always a character being scared by something that is slowly driving her more mad, and you as an audience member are feeling that tension. That jump scare in the trailer is just one of many different jump scares in this movie that really do work, and I think that's because there is no false jump scares, and because all these scares are very well done, and because the direction and the camera work and all these things are put together in a way that is believable because of the performances and because of the behind the scenes work on this film, I think it is serviceable enough in that way. And even though all these sequences are familiar, like I said, they all go one step further than other lazier movies would do, because these jump scare sequences would be a lot of false jump scares, or they wouldn't actually build tension. It's just, be a quiet scene and then something pops out at you that isn't actually scary, or there's nothing on screen that is genuinely creepy, or there isn't anything really happening with the story. There's no progression in this thing, because this movie could have been a lot lazier than it actually is. A great example of this is the end of the movie. So the end of the movie is, Rose's character decides to completely isolate herself, which is what I was rooting for her to do this entire movie. Is like, if you just isolate yourself, you might be able to survive this thing without having to murder someone. And so she isolates herself in her childhood home, and she has to perfectly confront, her dark past, her trauma with her mother in this moment. And it's a great character building stuff. You're rooting for her to be able to get past her childhood trauma, but at the same time, I'm kind of thinking in my head, it's like, oh, well, it's kind of giving the message that you don't want to confide in people to get past your trauma. It's telling you to bottle yourself in and kind of isolate yourself, which I think in terms of trauma, you shouldn't do that. But for the movie, who cares? But, the movie gets herself isolated, and she's in this cabin and she's dealing with this really creepy thing. And then, of course, she lights it on fire and she escapes and she thinks everything's all good. And then she goes to her, ex-husband, her cop character, and then they think that it's all over. But then, if you have a different horror movie that is lazier, then I think he's just going to have a smile and then she's going to kill herself, and then it's going to end right there. But it doesn't. It's actually an illusion, and she's still inside of that cabin. We go back to that, and this creepy monster thing just rips its face off, and it has a bunch of different smiles underneath it, and it is genuinely really creepy. I want to see more of this creature design because it was really, really well done. And I kind of wish the smiles throughout the movie kind of had that sort of tone to it, where the mouth is kind of stretching and it is just really disturbing, like the end of this movie. Whereas most of the smiles throughout the rest of the movie, some of it does feel goofy, but like I said, the tension and the direction in those sequences are good enough for me to forgive it. But with this ending sequence, I was like, wow, this is actually really interesting. But unfortunately, the cop is able to figure out where she went to. So he shows up at the cabin. She's freaking out that he's there, and then she runs back inside. She's taken over by this thing because this creature crawls into her mouth. It's, like I said, it's very disturbing. But now the main character is fully inflicted with this curse, and the ex-husband runs in and sees her, light herself on fire, and she kills herself, therefore passing off this curse to him. And I think that was a great way to end this movie. It wasn't like one of those last minutes, like, oh, the curse is still there, and you see somebody smiling in the background, and we cut to black. It just actually goes back to this cabin and goes through this really great sequence where you get to see this smiling monster. It was really cool. So I think this movie did end on a high note. I think all these scare sequences were really interesting, were really well done in terms of the direction and the camera work, and I think the main character had a lot more depth to her than I think a lot of other lazier movies would do with this type of concept. And so those are my thoughts on Smile. Have you guys seen it? What do you guys think of it? Was the lack of originality such a problem to you, or were you able to enjoy the ride that this movie brought you on? And what did you think of that ending? Because I think that ending really did move this movie up like another half star on Letterboxd. I think I gave it 3.5 out of 5 because it was pretty good. I actually did enjoy myself watching this thing. So thanks everybody for watching this review. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys comment down below, subscribe, and leave a like on this video. I'd really appreciate it. And also check out some of the other videos that I have on the channel, like for Pearl and Barbarian and other reviews just like this one. So thanks everybody, and hope to see you all in the next one.